So we're switching now to social capital. We've had quite an extensive concentration on natural capital over the last few days. Does my panel want to come up while I'm talking? Because we're quite running short of time. What we will do is run this panel until 11:15. Then we have some very short keynote speeches, and then it's coffee. Social capital. When I was asked to chair this panel, I actually had to go back to Google and look it up because it was so long since I'd used the word. It was very fashionable some 10 to 15 years ago. It was actually first spotted in an article in America on running schools, or involving neighborhoods in running schools back in 1916, so that the term is almost 100 years old. But it was publicized and popularized by a professor of public policy at Harvard called Robert Putnam, who wrote a very well-known book called Bowling Alone, the destruction and revival of the American community. And he had looked at the last 25 years, so from the 60s, 70s to the 90s, at how Americans worked together, met together, ate together. And he had found trends which showed that, for example, the number of Americans attending club meetings had reduced by 58% during that decade. The number of families having dinner together had gone down by 38%. And he saw this as being a negative impact. He calculated that if you attend a face-to-face meeting at a club, you have a 50% reduced chance of living another year, or not dying next year. So I don't know whether that applies to the Responsible Business Forum, that if you attend this place, you have a reduced or increased your chances of coming in next year. But the question of social capital and his book, I think, was contested by some people because they felt that what was happening in America was not the erosion of social capital, it was the evolution of social capital, that people, yes, were moving out to the suburbs. They were moving away from town hall meetings and local meetings, but they were moving online, obviously. And they were engaging and creating social capital in a different way through signing online petitions and being involved in other ways, becoming involved in campaigns which may have extended beyond their neighborhoods to other countries or indeed global campaigns. So that social capital term came into popularity about 10 years ago and was picked up by the World Bank, who started to say it was an extremely important determinant of development. In terms of business and the narrative around social capital and business, largely it was around internal social capital. Did businesses create networks within their businesses and between businesses which helped them to fulfill their business needs? And also, did individuals invest in social capital and then use that to further their careers? And perhaps the malign case of that is the old boys network, people who join exclusive clubs and use that in order to get business deals and positions. But it's also, in a more modern form, it comes in LinkedIn, and I'm sure you're all busy investing in your social capital there on the internet rather than listening to us. I'd like to turn to our panel here now. So we have a distinguished panel, a mixture of academia and business, starting with Dr. Maria Zenidou. She is a polymer chemist and has worked for Henkel, which makes sealants and shampoos, which should not be mixed. So the shampoos are Schwarzkopf, but the sealants come in many forms, and she started her job in the USA working for the National Adhesive Company, which was taken on by Henkel in 2008, I think. And then we have Holger Lindell. Holger is one of the he's the CFO of one of our sponsors, TÜV SÜD, which is a standards and certification and inspection agency. His background is as an aeronautical engineer, and he started his career working for Daimler and Mercedes, and many years spent in the region. We then have John Johnson. He is an academic. He's the professor of sustainability at the Sam J. Walton University in Arkansas. Walton was, of course, the founder of Walmart. And John Johnson also founded the Sustainability Consortium quite recently and has worked a lot on issues around social capital, social networks within a business context. We now have Jonathan Sanchez, who has a consultancy freshly formed this year called Stand Private. But prior to that, he had a long career working for Unilever, who won so many awards last night, and also for a number of significant communications and PR organizations in the UK and the US. And finally, we have Shinta Kandani, whose CV alone is an indication of the social capital that she has in her briefcase. She is the CEO of Synthesa, a company that she is the owner of in Indonesia, which is in a number of different sectors, including consumer, industry, property. But she's also the chair of the Employers Association of Indonesia. She's the president of the Indonesian Business Council for Sustainable Development, the vice chair of the World Wildlife Fund, and she founded the Global Entrepreneurial Program for Indonesia. So I think she has more social capital than the rest of us put together. So I'm going to turn to them first to ask them, what does the concept of social capital mean to you in your business or in the businesses that you've worked with or studied? Starting off with Maria.
Well, thank you for inviting me to be here. It's a pleasure to come and talk about the things we do at the Henkel. So we make products and solutions for either the consumer market and also the industrial business. In the whole value chain, we are very well positioned from the raw material supplier to the manufacturing, to the consumers, to the customers. And we feel that we have the opportunity, but also the responsibility to really influence the value chain. And we do that, I think, with what you call social capital, because it is about a new spirit of collaboration. It's about understanding the challenges, which I think we all know about sustainability, and really develop the partnerships based on trust with all the partners we have, whether it's a supplier, a customer, a consumer. And one very important piece is alignment. We cannot do these things independently. We don't drive things and initiatives independently. We align with partners, more than one, preferably along the way, so we move forward these initiatives, because it's not about making impact in one piece and then let the rest go. It's about influencing the whole value chain. And the other element, which is about putting seeds and educating the brains, it's a program we have, which is about volunteering and about developing our ambassador program at Henkel, that pretty much employees are trained on sustainability, and then we go out to different schools. And we teach students at 8 to 10 years old, which is our basically seeds. And they learn about sustainability, they learn how to save water, how to preserve energy, how to basically live more sustainable. And the interesting part is when they take it back to their parents and their families, and they challenge them, you know, to turn the light off when you are not in the room, to save water when you take a shower. All these things that it's interesting, they come back to us. I mean, to me, this is what we build for the future. So we do things now from a business and personal perspective, but it's also how we move forward with our education in terms of the young generation, those that they're going to be here in 30, 50, and 100 years.
Great. Thank you. And Holger, from your business perspective, what does it mean?
It's very encouraging to hear. We're very much aligned, and it's a great pleasure to be here on that panel. You asked the CFO on the panel, so if I hear capital, of course I have to look at the substance and I have to look at value. And these are the two elements, I think, that capital really means, and also social capital. It's not there, it's not for free, it's a result of an investment, and once you have it, it's not a privilege, it's an obligation to put it at good use and do something even better with that. What does it mean in business terms? I think it boils down to trust. And every company, and you mentioned that as well, basically build trust with your two major constituents, which are on the one hand your customers or your potential customers and hence society at large. On the other hand, it's the governments, regulators who build the framework for businesses and all stakeholders to thrive in a sustainable environment. And if I look back at when TÜV Süd was founded nearly 150 years ago, we were actually founded because social capital was destroyed. It was founded by operators and manufacturers of steam pressure vessel operators for the power plant industry in the first industrial revolution. And what happened is those things blew up and they killed people, they destroyed buildings, they damaged cities. So we were founded on the mantra to protect people, buildings, and society from adverse effect of technology. And this is today as relevant as it has always been. Just that trade and technology have become an inseparable part of each other. So when we look at companies today, at our customers, we help them to manage their very deep international supply chains and to make sure that their products are safe, that they're healthy. Think of children products, think of food. Everybody can connect to that, I think. And we make sure that wherever they're produced, in whatever country, they are produced to standards of safety, of health, and that builds huge social capital, of course, with the economies where you produce. It helps to protect the brands of our customers. It builds that trust that they can build on, and which is very, very expensive if you lose it. And it's not only compliance, it helps them to create value for themselves, for consumers, and for constituents.
Okay, thank you. So I'm hearing trust the whole time. I mean, the definition of social capital, one of the reasons I think it stopped being used was it had become so elastic and so big tent that everyone was putting anything into it. I went back to the OECD definition, which was around networks, which together with shared norms, values, and understandings facilitate cooperation within and among groups. John, I mean, you are working on this. Is this something that can be actually measured? Can it be valued? And can it be destroyed by business?
It can be measured. It can be valued. I don't know that it can be valued easily in a dollar sense. And I'm not sure that that would be a good idea. So social, for me, as an academic, social capital takes a fairly specific definition, a fairly specific meaning. We've talked about relationships and we talked about networks. So it's the relationships with individuals, between individuals. It's the nature of the relationship. It's not just trust, although trust tends to be a very important outcome. And it's also the position within the larger network that provides value for the individuals within the network. The logo actually for responsible business is oddly shaped like the way social networks tend to form in core periphery networks. Typically, when you go out and you study social networks in the real world, you'll find over and over and over again a core of people who are densely interconnected among themselves. They tend to be very influential. They tend to be the rainmakers, the decision makers in the community or the organization, surrounded by a periphery of people. And then the position within the network confers value in addition to the relationships themselves. When you try and value networks, typically what you need to do is figure out what the outcomes of value are. And they take many different forms. Very frequently when you're talking about individuals within networks, there are information benefits from being one of those central players. You get information more quickly than other people. You get information that tends to be more accurate, more holistic, more comprehensive than others. There are other benefits in terms of referrals. People, if you have good trusting relationships with people, they tend to act as agents for you even in your absence, which can be a very important outcome, a very important form of capital. There are access benefits, and this I think becomes a much more ominous component of social networks. You referred to old boy networks. Those access benefits can be very, very valuable, and they can be very, very inequitable, and et cetera. So that tends to be another component of another outcome from another return to social capital. Capital, by its definition, it generates returns. Those tend to be the individual level values. There are also, of course, values to the network itself. Social capital in networks provide opportunities for collective action, for joint decision making, for the creation of, well, governance. The term governance has been used today in a more broad sense than government. So those tend to be very important outcomes to social capital as well. How you put particular values on those kinds of outcomes is a very, very difficult question. So, and I haven't seen anyone. We as academics, I've done lots of research on this, we as academics come up with our own operationalizations, but they are not the kinds of things we would take to business in a dollar form.
I mean, I've seen an estimate in the UK that the value of volunteering is something like 1.2% of GDP, but you could argue that's just the value of unpaid labor, a bit like the value of housework.
Right.
And Jonathan, I think you feel somewhat similar to that. I mean, what's your perception of social capital, having worked within a big corporation but now set out on your own? Do you see it in the same way as being something that businesses can invest in?
Thank you for the the question. Thank you to Dr. De Boer as well, who we just heard speak. I saw him at the SCG Sustainable Development Conference in Bangkok this week. Brilliant man. To your question, my company is called STAND because we formed it to work with people and partners that stood for what we stand for. So I'm going to answer your question as set out in the brief, and then I'll go specifically to your point. The first reason we formed it was to work with leaders. So in Southeast Asia, we work with politicians, CEOs, civil society organizations on one-on-one consulting to help them unlock their purpose and their leadership, and help them define what we call cultural capital, because there is this rising homogenization of globality that affects areas that are developing. I find that word pejorative, but the emerging markets is also somewhat pejorative given China invented paper. But these markets, there's a homogenization occurring. So our company works individually with leaders to help them unlock that potential, and we call that cultural capital. The second thing we do, from my history of running sustainability for Unilever on 4 of their regions, so Russia, Africa, Southeast Asia, and South Asia, is work with companies on sustainable development. So throughout the value chain, supply chain, so it's great to have a really diverse panel. So my job was not the PR guy or the spin guy. It was to go to the Chi Chi factory in Vietnam and sort out contract labor issues. It was to look at tea picking plantations in Tanzania and Kenya and look at sexual favors in return for promotion. And the third part of my organization works with civil society organizations and unlocking their IP. My problem is, and I think I get invited to these things because I'm controversial. I respect the panel, but I'm going to be direct because that's exactly why my clients work with me. I think there is a massive misunderstanding of that phrase. I would rather we called it positive social capital, because social capital is actually very damaging. And the history of the term, as you have rightly alluded and we discussed over coffee, is entirely pejorative and very, very subjective. You know, my company works with clients to unlock their purpose, drive sustainable business, because as Jonathan Porritt said, anything that's sustainable can be done forever, which is basically creating social capital. And then unlock the power of NGOs and CSOs to help them do it better. So when you ask me what I think about the phrase social capital, I find it rather irritating. I think Bordeaux started talking about it as a very neutral term. He said it was neither positive nor negative, as you said. Putnam went on to talk more poignantly, said it could be a producer of civil engagement, but it's also not actually, when looked at in its truest sense, the most equal of engagements. And you and I discussed this quite frankly this morning. There are certain authoritarian regimes in this part of the world which are a result of entirely social capital. There are certain governments, there are certain companies, old boys networks, as you say, that are still endorsed and created through social capital. So we continue to use this word, which really can at times, when used incorrectly, lead to exclusion of the bottom of the pyramid. It can lead to restrictions on freedom and information. It can lead to the downward normalization of trends, so the lowest common denominator. And it can lead to excess claims on group members. So I think definition of terms is really, really important, this old boys network. So a couple of examples. Onyx in 2000 talked about, I've done 2 minutes, I've got 1 minute left. Onyx in 2000 talked about Australian policy, I do keep to time, talked about Australian policy on social inclusion, referred to it as a social, what are we calling it? Social impact project? Social capital project? But in fact, it was not. It led to more social disclusion and exclusion of indigenous communities. So it was seen as a massive failure. Some might say the emerging or previous establishment in Myanmar was the result of social capital and networking. So I think to continue to call it social capital and to define it in the positive sense is misleading. And I think moving into a positive social capital environment is important. Companies like Unilever, who I work for, set out to double their business, half their environmental impact, and increase positive social impact in 8 years. They've had 18 straight quarters of growth by making money. And I believe, and Stan believes, that great social capital is the ability to do well and do good. I don't believe in volunteerism. I think it's poverty porn. I think every time you send 20 people to go and repaint a school, you are damaging local economies. So I don't believe that the giving levels that you quote from the UK are similarly culturally here, because there's a responsibility to give if you're Buddhist or Muslim. So I think unlocking the real meaning of social capital is to redefine it as positive social capital. The Havas Meaningful Brands Index looked at the top 100 brands who built positive social capital into their business models. Top 100 businesses bought a share in each, outperformed every indices by 120%. That, to me, is positive social capital. There's 625 million people living in ASEAN, an incredible, diverse, culturally rich community, of which the biggest issue is not creating more social capital. The biggest issue is closing the inequality gap. So how we create new networks of positive social capital that don't just talk about Walmart and Cargill and field to market, but actually talk about lifting, as WWF said, lifting the poor, bringing down the top and meeting in the middle. That's the positive social capital that I stand for.
So what I'm hearing from that is that unlike yesterday, where we were all very against the destruction of natural capital, and nobody would stand up in the room and say, no, natural capital should be destroyed. In some cases, the destruction of social capital is a positive thing, and
Absolutely.
in particular, where it's the destruction of networks of corruption and cronyism
Absolutely.
and so on. Turning to Shinta and Indonesia, where these are issues which are very high on the business agenda, what does social capital mean to you in your work, both with the Indonesian Business Society and you as a businesswoman?
I think first and foremost, when we look at the term social capital, for us, this is a term as if we are speaking on a completely new language. What I'm trying to say here, in Indonesia, I think we're still very far off in terms of definition and understanding. And I think this is where we have to go back to basics. When I was asked, I'm the vice chairman of the Indonesian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, when 3 years ago I was asked to lead this effort on sustainability and bringing all the private sector together, I realized that we can't be, like what's mentioned before, we can't be relying only on these big companies. Of course, all the multinational in Indonesia, based on compliance, will have done the work. But what is important is they need to share what they've done and bring it and educate our local companies. And this is where we stand as the chamber. I think our work can only be done when we can fill in that gap. And, you know, we've been... It's when this effort has been initiated, you know, we see that the stakeholders are in different paths, whether NGO is completely on the other side, and then government, and then private sectors. You know, we're like in all these different sides and different directions. So the first most important thing is how to bring them all together, right? And how can we have this stakeholder collaborative approach, how we can have this stakeholder dialogue, start talking, I said, you know, and this is really the biggest part. So for us, we're still in this education approach, in understanding what is really social capital, how companies can really be doing their work. And I have to say that after the 3 years effort we're doing, I mean, we're sitting now, we're quite proud of the work that we've done with some of the local companies. And when we talk about local companies, we're not just talking about the big ones, because our SME is 80% of our private sector in Indonesia. So when they have to bring into this whole effort, we're looking into big companies, multinationals, how can they also bring our SME coming to the picture? And one area that we've been very much working on is on the social entrepreneurship, social enterprise approach. This is the easiest, working the BOP, microfinancing, work on the supply chain of the, this is all what finally the puzzles put together. But you know, what is very frustrating is somehow I feel if there is a way that we can act like a photocopy machine, you know, like how we can copy very much faster, scale up much faster, and bringing in more private sector, doing work with all this as our SME. I think this is where the challenge lies. So I don't want to touch too much on definition, because for us, it's the execution, it's what the deliverable when companies can really show their works, and not just individual companies. When we look at the best practices now shared, we can see that we're not talking about one or two. You know, we're talking about multiplier effect. And I think this is where our job is continuing on. We have a new government in place. Believe me, it's like restarting an engine, you know, because you heard our president. He's very much, you know, he's very clear, sustainable development, pro-job, pro-growth, very clear. New government, new idea, new directions, right? I mean, it's like there is a certain restarting point that we have to do again. But it is crucial because we need to have policies, we need to have standards. When we work on a social capital issue, this is relating to a lot of the policy and regulations as well. We need incentives, right? We can't be working alone. So I think we will continue this collaborative approach. And sure enough, I hope one day I can sit in the same panel with these people and I can say, yes, you know, Indonesia have achieved so far, and we can also share what we have done in the past.
So we need a photocopier. So Ricoh won an award last night, but we've got to set them a new challenge that they need to be able to develop a photocopier to photocopy some of this sort of activity. Yeah, Jonathan, you want to?
I just wanted to add to your comments. I mean, you know, my introduction was about definition of terms. At Unilever, we call it positive social impact. Now, if you look at Unilever Indonesia, a company that's been there for 80 years, it's publicly listed. I understand your point about SMEs. Unilever Indonesia has invested so much time in development and developing Indonesia. 140 million school children learn how to wash their hands with Lifebuoy soap. Now a government shared program. Green and Clean, over 60 cities in Jakarta have helped greening their environment. Waste recycling, we're paying women to bring packaging back into Unilever's supply chain and reverse logistics, reduces waste, creates entrepreneurialism. So when big companies do get it right with brilliant countries like Indonesia, I think you can have positive social impact. Never mind the capital, you have positive social impact.
And I was hearing the words collaboration, particularly from Shinta. I mean, collaboration amongst businesses, certainly. What about collaboration with other players, and particularly with NGOs, with civil society organisations? Are we seeing shifts in the way those organisations are seeking to use social capital to work with business to affect change? John, do you want to kick off on that one?
Well, my sense is that over the last 2 decades or so, the ecosystem of NGOs has evolved quite a lot, so that we see many more NGOs willing to collaborate with business. At the same time, in that ecosystem, I think there remain a lot of NGOs that are still activists who are campaigning for change. And I generally view that as a positive thing. So the way I see it, the social capital in the form of the relationship between the NGOs and the corporations is a good thing, generally speaking. And then there's the other issue of the social capital that is generated in the communities and societies that the companies are working in, which I think is an entirely separate question, and probably more important question. And I think these are the things that Jonathan's referring to, is are the companies that are operating in these communities and these societies driving, I think he and I disagree on the term social capital, but are they driving the creation of positive social capital or negative social capital?
Yeah.
And that, I think, is a largely underexplored question.
What examples can you think of companies driving the development of negative social capital, or indeed destroying it?
He's probably better for the negative, and I can point to perhaps a couple of positives.
You can look at, I mean, for example, you can look at Monsanto. I think Monsanto's work, I think that your company is advising them, or via a partnership that was released a few days ago. I don't know, Field to Market, Monsanto.
Field to Market, we have a lot of companies in the...
So I think companies like Monsanto suing neighboring farms for seeds that biologically are transmitted into different land areas don't do a particularly good job. I think we had issues when I worked in agency world at J. Walter Thompson and at your RSCG. We had issues working with Exxon. So I think there are a multitude of examples of where social capital can be damaging. I was at a conference 2 weeks ago where a man from a company that I won't name, Prudential, who run the foundation, said, and I quote, this is negative social capital, we have no need to speak to governments because governments can't teach us about insurance without thinking about the social welfare state that many countries have provided insurance for their citizens every day. So I think there are plenty of examples of negative social capital.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to get the discussion back on this question, John, that you asked, the value. What value do you put to that? And I think we're circling around that. The fact that NGOs and business is working together, I think, is a simple admission that business is good for development. Not every business, but sustainable business, because it drives growth, it drives employment, it gets people out of poverty. So it is the main driver for development. And it's not sufficient just to have a dialogue and to talk to each other, but what we heard this morning from the president and from World Wildlife Fund is this call to action. We need to do something. And everybody can do a little bit in that big clockwork. And I think businesses can do a great deal, even though it's not the full scope, it's some small things.
And,
we did the research.
On that
the
point,
value,
I mean,
yeah.
we've got sort of questions coming in, and the top vote at the moment is how can we ensure that businesses benefit the bottom of the pyramid?
Exactly.
So can you
So
give some
the answer is
examples
coming straight
within
away.
your
Yeah, we
within your
did.
side?
Thanks. We did a research 2 years ago, which is called the TÜV Süd Safety Gorge, and that looked exactly into that element. 50% of world GDP. It covered the US, UK, China, India, Japan, and we looked at what consumers would value in safe products or audited products, where the supply chain is really audited for social compliance, for quality, and for safety. And amazingly, 80%, nearly 80% of the consumers are willing to pay a premium of up to 16%,
Yeah.
which is significant, right? As a value that you can create if you have yourself audited. The other one, cost avoidance, is most of the companies we interviewed had, in average, 10 recalls in the last 5 years. And these recalls cost them 9% of their sales. And they admit that to make modifications to their production, they would have to spend another 20%, 19% to make production really sustainable. But they're not doing it. So 55% of manufacturers, 41% of retailers, nevertheless, despite those facts, do not get audited. So there's a great deal of things that can be done in making your supply chain more transparent, safer, creating social capital in those countries, and creating immediate value for your customers and for your stakeholders.
Yeah, I just want to add. I think we should find a development models in terms of the responsible business. You know, for example, we were using the social investment return. You know, how can we calculate actually in terms of measuring the return for social investment? And I think this is something that somehow there has to be a way to then be able to measure it. And you know, I wanted to share a little bit example of what we've done, for example, with some of our palm oil producers in Indonesia. At one time, basically, our palm oil producer has been really put on hit by the NGOs, and you know, it's like they're really enemies, you know. And now we're able to see some example of palm oil companies that have worked very, very well with NGO, with specific MBO, you know, our leading producer, GAR, with Greenpeace, with WWF, with some others. So I can see that actually when you find somehow the mechanism of working, you know, there is a way of doing it. We just did a pledge at the UN climate change on deforestation for palm oil producers. And of course, when you look at our pledge, a big part of it is the social capital aspect. It is a big part when we talk about diversity. So what I'm trying to say is that we've got, it seems impossible. I mean, when we talk about the pledge, it's such an ambitious plan. People think, Indonesian company can do something like this. This is all PR only, you know. Like I think sometimes this is always the problem when you want to try to do something good with social capital. The connotation is like this is public relation, this is image building, you know. And I think this is something that at the end of the day, you're tired of hearing it. So the only way is to show it, right? Yeah. Okay, this is the things that we have done. So I think again, you know, measuring I think is important. And once we have that standard, I think that really would be very much helpful.
Okay. Jonathan, you're twitching.
Well, I'm going to, and I think you can hit me, you can do what you like. I'm going to, if you want to hit me, hit Paul Polman at the same time.
Yeah.
I told you, the company made a commitment, double its size, halve its impact, and increase positive social impact. 18 quarters of straight growth. I think we've also talked, and I have spoken, about natural capital accounting, which I am not in favour of. I think we are tripping over ourselves to continue trying, as you've said, to define what this model is. What is this capital? Hence why I don't like the term, because I don't think we'll settle. Singaporeans, I found out this morning, live like they have 4. Americans live like we have 3 planets, Europeans 1.5. The reality is, to be really blunt, the way we will measure the success of social capital is how these businesses succeed, because there are no more resources. Our crops are failing. Our people are uprising and collectivizing. Inequality is creating conflict. There's no more cake. So there's going to be more M&A, more aggressive behavior, and the companies that utilize the resources that they have, and I have been to RSPO meetings in Indonesia, and at WEF I've met with all of those producers who've worked really hard to make a difficult situation in social capital much better. Commendation to you for the work you've put into that. But it's really simple. The companies that do well with social capital will do good on the bottom line. And even Unilever is moving towards integrated financial reporting. Stick to the numbers. If you look at the turnover, that's the best indicator you've got that you're doing well and doing good.
But there are some companies in highly profitable sectors. I mean, the largest company in the world is still Exxon, is it, I think? We've got a question here about which industries severely lack trust. A lack of trust, not much trust in the extractives industry, and the bottom line don't necessarily seem to be tied up. I mean, within the view of the panel, which are the...
There's not much trust in you in the extractive industry, but for the Indonesians who've moved out of abject poverty into the middle class, there's quite a lot of trust in the power of
how do the
green gold.
How do the Indonesians see the extractives industries and trust it?
Well, I have to say I will still pick that sector as obviously the hardest to turn around, but they've come a long way. So I have to say what Chevron have done, even in Indonesia, you know, Freeport, Chevron, you know, when we have, they've done a lot of social capital. The problem is sometimes it's not socialized properly. Very, very simple, you know, and this is why misunderstanding, mistrust start happening with the community, with the indigenous people, you know, it's all, this is all really about communication at the end of the day as well. So I think, although I have to say that's really the industry, but I think it's also have come a long way. And I think Indonesia itself, I have to say, you know, we would never imagine we're sitting here, even with multinationals already championing a lot of this program, you know, that we can go this far and evaluating this. But again, you know, I really believe the work that what Unilever had, I mean, it's incredible. And I've spoke with Unilever, with even Paul Polman, I mentioned this, you know. I want to see Unilever standing there, leading this effort as well, you know. I know all this work, but we need to follow the wagon. You know, it's like all the effort that's being done. We want to see more of this in Indonesia, and I think the government also start looking into all these different approaches and how to bring in these pictures together. And I think incentive. I want to touch about incentive because more and more this becomes an evaluative process. You know, why is incentive so important? Is it important? To me, it is. There has to be some sort of incentive here.
Okay.
However, when we look at, I mean, sustainability for us is the platform that we run our business. So we talk about trust. If we don't have trust with our suppliers, manufacturing, partners, consumers, and customers, we don't have business. So, I mean, these things, to me, it's not like it's additional or it's a nice to have. It's something that actually drives our business. This is how we operate. What I think we are doing right now, and it's not about measuring, what we are doing right now is become more systematic in how we evaluate if we are doing enough. So we roll out our innovation strategy with 22 KPIs. Pretty much every product, everything we bring into the market for consumer or automotive industry, it has to contribute. It has to help. We know we are going to run out of raw materials. So we have our 2030 strategy. Again, these are not things that they are, sustainability is like a nice to have. We cannot run our business by 2030 unless we triple, that's our target, the value that our products bring, reducing the carbon footprint. Why? Because we're going to run out of raw materials. We're going to actually close the door and say we don't have anything else to make. So it is a business topic to me. It's also caring about our earth and our environment and everything, but it is a business, really business intrinsic topic. And trust drives, trust drives our business.
Okay.
Yeah, I just thought of, since you mentioned Indonesia, of two other opportunities where businesses can immediately build up social capital. I mean, one is investments. When we are looking in our ASEAN region, we are looking at investing in the different countries in joint ventures with SMEs, and then basically if you set up a lab there, all that does is it enables the local producers to bring their products to the world market, and that drives growth, right? Because it creates trust for the local industry immediately on the global market, and we make sure that those products comply by international standards.
I want to add a little bit. I think that policy framework is important. You know, when we talk about this, we cannot just say this is an effort of individual companies, but how can the government put that policy framework and bring this?
Absolutely.
And this is how then we can.
Yes. And that's where we have to work together, right? This
Yeah.
investment
Yeah.
needs to be facilitated. The regulatory framework needs to be there. That's exactly this.
So one last question I want to take, and it's for Jonathan, but I then want to throw it to the rest of the panel. Somebody in the audience has picked up on your comment that volunteerism is poverty porn.
Oh, I knew
Can
somebody
you
was gonna
explain
bring
that, they
this
say?
up.
And I want to hear from the others. Do you feel that
I'm not-
volunteers fit with the corporation?
Yeah, I've brought research on it. I'm happy to, you can email me, Jonathan at Stan.consulting, and I'll send you the research. There's a piece we wrote for Marketing Interactive /Asia, which had 2,000 shares in 24 hours, which talks about this. The issue that many countries are finding now, especially in Southeast Asia, the less developed countries like Laos, Cambodia, is there's an illicit industry in creating either fake or inauthentic experiences for tourists to experience what they believe to be poverty. There's now an economic impact on local communities because the idea of, and a colleague of mine who runs a PR company, I was quite irritated about, you know, we went to Bangkok and we're going to spend the afternoon at a slum and we're going to repaint all these slum houses. Now, back to your point, which I completely agree with. Firstly, none of us have talked about this, or maybe I wasn't listening, so forgive me. We've all talked about the private sector. You know, let's talk about government incentives, to your point. So governments have a role to play because people do pay taxes where they're collected. So what volunteerism does is it destroys local economies, it removes skill sets, and it further enables governments in some markets which have less control and less tax collection ability and less care and concern to grow their social capital.
Volunteerism? Yep, from a Henkel point of view.
If we just paint a house in a very simple way that someone locally could do as a job, then I agree with your point. But if we develop skills, if we teach young women to become hairdressers, we do that through the hair care division, we give opportunities and skills to have a job, to be out of poverty, out of the bad things that could happen, to develop this. Yeah? So to me, it's all about developing skills, educating people, increasing the awareness. I like to volunteer and build schools. And I will tell you why. My mother was born before the war in Greece. And when she was about to go to school, the school was destroyed, and it took them 8 years to build the school. That's how long it took. It took 10 years to build a church. So when she started at school, she was already 13 years old. My mom, graduated from high school with very basic education, you can imagine. So when I can go with my team and build a school that it would take the local, village 5 or 10 years to build it, I think that's not disrupting.
But
To me, that's
and I
enabling
respect
kids
that.
to go to school 5 or 10 years younger, earlier.
I respect that entirely, but without I respect that entirely, but without an education infrastructure, there are thousands of empty schools built by tourists on poverty porn trips that have no books and no teachers.
Not all.
This is exactly the point.
I think they're
Not all sex is porn. In fact, most sex is not porn. Porn is porn, right?
Should we end on that note?
Should we have porn? No. Should we have poverty porn? No. I'm not for poverty porn. I am for volunteerism in the 99% of instances in the world every day where it's a socially beneficial thing. I mean, you make a very good point. We shouldn't enable excesses in any institution, and we should point it out when it exists. But it feels like we're attacking an institution that is part and parcel of what makes the world go
round. Okay, thank you.
Let's have coffee.
Okay, thank you very much to my panel. Thank you for the questions from the audience. We could have taken much longer to answer your questions and talk and hear from Jonathan on this, but he'll be around in the coffee break. Over to you.